Welcome to Taiwan Report News Brief, news and analysis from Taiwan. I'm Donovan Smith. We got a big show up ahead, including a whole lot of coronavirus news, which is both local and international. U.S. employees stand up for Taiwan. Taipei tries out self-driving buses. Taiwan's banks increase their exposure to the PRC. But let's kick off with possibly the most Pan-Blue Gaffe I've ever seen. Han Guoyu, speaking at a 228 memorial event, said by accident, referred to it as 823. Now, 228, for those of you who don't know, is when technically it started on 227, but this is when the KMT arrived in Taiwan and there was a lot of corruption and violence, and Taiwanese rose up. This led to a massacre. And so this is an event commemorating the victims of the KMT-led massacre back in the 1940s. Now, 823 is a totally different historical issue. This is when the KMT-led forces on Jinmen were suffering under artillery fire from China and the Chinese Communist Party. So in a sense, what he did is he took the victims' memorial of something the KMT did, substituted it for something the KMT felt that they were the victims of from the Chinese Communist Party. But wait, it gets worse. He mixed up the name of Taiwanese revolutionary Xie Xuehong. Now, she led the forces down in Taichung that rebelled. It was an armed rebellion, and then they went into Nantou and fought some battles, and eventually she lost and ran off to China. Now, he mixed her up with Wang Xuehong, who is Sher Wang, who is the head of HTC and is famously socially conservative and put in a lot of money to fight marriage equality. All right, Taipei Times, virus outbreak. Su eyeing good offense, promotes CECC. Premier Su Zhenchang yesterday promoted the Central Epidemic Command Center from a Level 2 to a Level 1 government entity to streamline communication and better contain the spread of COVID-19, while Minister of Health and Welfare Chen Shizhong would continue to serve as head of the center. Now, Level 1 means that they have better access to resources and the like. Now, continuing with the Taipei Times, virus outbreak, Premier approves special budget items. Premier Su Zhenchang yesterday approved proposed items in a 60 billion NT dollar budget created under the Special Act on COVID-19 Prevention, Relief, and Restoration, passed on Tuesday, including compensation totaling 1.82 billion NT dollars for people placed in quarantine and those who need to take leave to care for quarantined family members. The special budget would be sourced in equal portions from surplus revenue from previous fiscal years and loans. Now, the Focus Taiwan went with Cabinet approves 60 billion budget bill to cope with coronavirus as their headline. Now, and it notes that it's going to be submitted to the Legislative Yuan for approval. Back to the Taipei Times. Virus outbreak, confirmed cases, tip of iceberg, Vice President says. Confirmed cases of COVID-19 are only the tip of the iceberg, as some patients only exhibit mild or no symptoms, Vice President Chen Jinren said yesterday when sharing responses given in an interview with Japanese media. Now, he went on to say, however, that Taiwan has done a good job of containing the virus. However, it's worth noting that he's an epidemiologist, and he also served as the Minister of Health in 2003 during the SARS epidemic, so he does know what he's talking about. All right, some possible good news. Taiwan is gearing up for clinical trials of remdesivir in March. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. American drug maker Gilead Sciences is expanding clinical trials of its investigational antiviral drug for the treatment of novel coronavirus into several Asian countries outside China, including Taiwan, in March. All right, moving on, more Taipei Times with an AFP article. Chinese trolls decried for fake news. Authorities have accused Chinese internet trolls of sowing panic over COVID-19, with much of the disinformation falsely implying that the nation has an out-of-control epidemic. Police said they are investigating a surge in stories spreading online and through social media, claiming that President Tsai Ing-wen's administration is trying to cover up an outbreak. We suspect that Chinese internet trolls are making up and spreading the false messages based on the content and the phrases, the Ministry of Justice's Investigative Bureau said in a statement. Now, this goes on here. Analysts have said that trolls have gotten better over the past few years at deploying traditional Chinese and Taiwanese phrasing, but much of the misinformation on the virus appears to be more rudimentary. One example given by the Bureau was a false social media message claiming to be written by the child of a DPP legislator, saying that Taipei dares not disclose more than 500 infections and 200 deaths. Another false message claimed that the administration of, quote, Governor Tsai, a term used by people in China to refer to the president, is covering up the cremation of bodies, the Bureau said. The Taiwan Fact Check Center, an independent organization that debunks misinformation, said that there has been a surge in false posts deploying simplified Chinese characters or phrases commonly used in China. What this smells like to me, because as they mentioned here, that the trolls have gotten better at deploying traditional Chinese and Taiwanese phrasing, is that a lot of people right now are under quarantine or locked up at home, and so the amateurs are coming out, and they're not quite as good. Travel alert related to, this is Focus Taiwan, travel alert related to Italy's inclusion of Taiwan as part of China. I mentioned the other day that it seemed very likely that the Taiwanese government was responding to this in several previous actions, and now they're coming out and admitting it. All right, moving on to the South China Morning Post. Coronavirus threat shows unacceptability of Beijing isolating Taiwan, U.S. official says. This is a pretty strong statement. Now, the global spread of the new coronavirus has prompted the U.S. government to push back against Beijing's isolation of Taiwan, a State Department official said on Thursday. Quote, this COVID-19 outbreak only further underlines the unacceptability of Taiwan being excluded from the WHO and the WHA because the People's Republic of China blocks every attempt to do so, said Jonathan Fritz, Deputy Assistant Secretary at the U.S. State Department's Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs. Quote, we continue to push back very, very hard against that with as many of our like-minded partners as possible. And I think our argument is only bolstered now by the outbreak, Fritz said, speaking in a House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing on the U.S. response to the contagion's threat. And I would like to point out, this push by the U.S. government is fully consistent with our U.S. One China policy and, of course, with the Taiwan Relations Act. All right, back to the Taipei Times. Financial sector last month boosts China exposure. The combined exposure of the banking, insurance, and securities and futures industries advanced 1.12% at the end of last month from a month earlier to U.S. $63.96 billion, the commission said. Now, for reference, the GDP of Taiwan in U.S. dollars, according to Wikipedia, if that's to be trusted, is 1.3 trillion. So obviously this isn't a major portion of the GDP. It's several percentage points, roughly 5%. However, that could be and probably is a very significant percentage of their funds. So that's a concern. Now it says here, exposure to China accounted for 46.4% of the banking sector's net worth last month, up from 46% at the end of the fourth quarter of last year, but still down from 48.7% in the third quarter, the Commission's data showed. Now, the FSC has asked lenders to set aside more funds to cover potential bad debts, requiring them to prepare an allowance for bad debts equal to at least 1.5% of their loans offered in the Chinese market, more than the 1% in regular cases. To put this in perspective, I've seen some figures and heard some things which suggest that most private companies in China have perhaps 1 to 3 months worth of funding. If the coronavirus continues and everything remains on lockdown, and keep in mind that a lot of the workers in the country went to their homes, leaving the industrial cities, going back to the country or where they came from, and because of the quarantines, they're stuck back where they came from, not in the big companies or small companies where they actually work. So even if they wanted to go back to work, and a lot of companies in China are offering bonuses, they can't because they're not allowed to travel. So a lot of companies in China expect that they're going to start going broke over the next few months if the coronavirus isn't contained. So probably in the next few weeks, we're going to start seeing more and more bankruptcies coming out of China. China is, of course, already deeply in debt, but it's worth noting that most of the debt is internal, which gives them considerably more flexibility, and it's also in their own currency. All right, just quickly to note, Taipei to start uncrewed bus road testing in May. So this is kind of fun. Now they're going to allow city residents to take part in the trial services beginning in September, and the city government is looking to automated buses as a solution to the shortage of nighttime public vehicle drivers. All right, that makes sense. I'm always interested in these kind of stories. Now the testing will be up and down Xinyi's dedicated bus lanes. Now, this is a very interesting story. This is ABC News from the United States, and this kind of made me a little happy to read. Now, the story is Chinese censorship or, quote, work elsewhere inside Shutterstock's free speech rebellion. Stan Pavlovsky, the number 2 executive at the photo service Shutterstock, sounded frustrated at what was supposed to be a celebration of a significant company milestone in December. Employees instead focused on what had become an increasingly sensitive topic within the company: censorship and China. Months earlier, at the request of the Chinese government, Shutterstock had begun censoring a few searches by users based in China for politically volatile subjects like Taiwan flag. Shutterstock employees who disagreed with the blacklist on free speech grounds kept asking about it at every big internal meeting. So that day, Pavlovsky told them they were free to seek jobs elsewhere. Quote, "The beauty of where we live and where we work is that we're free to make these choices," Pavlovsky told employees at the meeting at Shutterstock's offices, according to a recording of the meeting posted to the company internal website and heard by NBC News. And so, it's a great market, he continued, and employees have a lot of opportunities to work there, to work elsewhere, and we are very supportive when employees do not feel that this is the right place for them to pursue other opportunities. The reaction was shock for more than 180 Shutterstock employees, about 20% of the company, who had signed a petition opposing the Chinese request, even at the risk of the company's losing access to a potentially lucrative market, according to an employee who said they were at the meeting. Several people were like, "Whoa, he just told us all to quit," said the employee, who spoke on condition of anonymity, fearing potential or possible retaliation. Now, employees have left Shutterstock in protest of the company's not making more of a stand on human rights, Hayden and a current employee said, bringing the total number of departures to 3. More employees are considering doing the same, 2 current employees said. Now, it's good to see people in the United States, employees and companies, standing up to the PRC and, at least in part, for Taiwan. All right, some interesting articles to read today. Oh, by the way, the last article was NBC, not ABC. Forgive the mistake. All right, foreign policy, some things to read today. Foreign Policy Research Institute: if U.S. forces have to leave the Philippines, then what? This is very relevant to Taiwan's security. In the Taipei Times, there's an editorial, given their benefits, ease rules on drones. It makes a good case for the positive advantages of drones, but it doesn't really touch on the negatives like security breaches and potential privacy violations. All right, JPR, the Journal of Political Risk. Time to bring Taiwan in from the cold. Start working towards a normalization of relations. That's by Garrett Vanderwees. All right, finally, the last one is Ketagalan Media has a great article out. New policies fighting epidemics must take basic rights into account. Now, this article was written a few days ago and then translated for Ketagalan Media, and it talks about some of the basic rights. Now, this doesn't cover what I mentioned the other day, that in the new law there are name and shame provisions for people who break quarantine. So there's more to the story that's developed since. But it's worth checking out. Again, Ketagalan Media. All right, the news is ongoing. Be sure to check report.tw. These articles will all be posted up so you can follow along, or if you want to go in more into depth in any one of these stories. I look forward to more of your audience listening tomorrow.
This has been brought to you by the Taiwan Report. For more content like this, become our patron at report.tw.
哎呦，就是那个台湾狗啦，最喜欢我的台湾狗了。